When the past strikes back. How I changed the course of a life starting with empty pockets. This story kicks off 31 years ago, but the real twist, the revenge, started by pure chance about 2 years ago. I'll cut some parts short because it's a wild journey, but feel free to ask me anything. I've learned a ton along the way, and part of why I'm sharing this is to pass on what I picked up. The beginning. Back in 1990, right after I finished middle school and my sister was still in elementary, my dad met his third wife at the only gas station in our small town. They moved in together not long after, and my dad left us in our basement apartment to shack up on a rundown houseboat with her. This houseboat didn't even run. He'd show up every other week and toss me $40 for groceries. Eventually, someone caught wind of our situation and called my mom, who took us in. Which, believe it or not, was an even worse setup. Dad married his new wife in 1991. Not long after, she called me up, claiming Dad's brain tumor had come back. It hadn't, and said he couldn't handle the stress of being around us. According to her, the only people he could stand were her and her son, Mitch, who was my age. When I asked my dad about it, he denied it, but was shocked she'd even say something like that. That was one of our last conversations, until 2 years ago. The middle. There's not much to this part. I scraped my way through college, sometimes living out of my car. Dad and I didn't talk, but I heard through the family grapevine that he bought a house and helped Mitch through some trade school classes. When my grandmother passed away, Mitch and my dad's wife swooped in with a truck and took all the furniture and anything else that wasn't nailed down. Eventually, I cut ties with my dad's side of the family altogether. I struggled for years, decades really, but I made it through. Now, I've got a solid job and a great family. Guess they're right when they say the best revenge is living well. The pre-end warm-up. 2 years ago, in October 2019, I got a call from my uncle Mark. He told me my dad was in a nursing home in another state and that he needed my help, seriously. Mitch had ghosted him. It turned out the nursing home was just about 20 minutes from my place and I saw an opportunity, so I went. Our reunion was nothing special. I wasn't there to make peace, but I was curious about how he ended up alone and stranded in another state. And boy, did he have a story. His wife had gotten lung cancer and put him in a nursing home before she passed in 2017. She suffered, and I was glad to hear it, though I wish it had been something nastier, like colon cancer. When she died, Mitch took over as his power of attorney, POA, and had been living in Dad's house with his kids, supposedly managing things. But now Mitch was nowhere to be found, and Dad was worried about him. He wanted me to drive the hour and a half to his place to check on things. That's all he wanted. He didn't even bother asking how I'd been. I agreed, mainly out of morbid curiosity. I'd never seen the place where Dad lived with his real family for 30 years. I wanted a glimpse of the life I never had. It was a disaster. The grass was jungle high, and you couldn't even get to the front door because of the overgrown mess. There were 3 trucks in the yard, all filled with trash, seats, beds, you name it, stuffed with garbage. I couldn't believe my eyes. Even Dad's handicapped accessible SUV had 4 flat tires and was crammed with junk. I didn't have a key, so I just walked around the outside. From the windows I could peek into, the inside was a wreck, cluttered with hoarded junk. There were notices plastered all over the front and side doors, warning that the city was planning to condemn the place. Even the carport was filled with rotting boxes stacked on top of each other. The yard was a dumping ground. Broken Christmas decorations, rusted tools, old toys. The mailbox held a letter stating that since the house appeared abandoned, mail delivery was being suspended. That night, I looked up everything I could about powers of attorney. The next day, I went back to Dad's nursing home and showed him all the pictures I took. He raged, saying he'd beat Mitch's ass, then asked me to help more. I told him I would, but only if he signed over full power of attorney to me, both financial and medical. If he didn't, he could figure this mess out on his own. He agreed, so I found a lawyer willing to drive to another state and do the paperwork right in the nursing home. This lawyer was a godsend. He put together a rock-solid POA with all the fine print I didn't even know I needed. He also handled the paperwork to revoke Mitch's POA. Now I was in control. The beginning of the end. We come from a small rural town, the kind of eerie, tucked-away place where no matter how far or long you've been gone, the second you come back, you'll run into someone you know, or at least someone who knows you. It's like living in a never-ending game of 6 degrees of everyone, and it feels suffocating at times. But occasionally, it can work in your favor. The next morning, I got to work. I didn't know just how much damage I was going to cause, and I didn't want Mitch or anyone from his large interbred family tracing anything back to me. So I made sure none of my actions had my name on them. First, I created a Google account for my dad and set up a Google phone number. Then I got him a P.O. box in his town and set up mail forwarding. I pulled his credit report, took the POA to his tiny hometown bank, updated his account addresses, and changed all his account numbers. I also requested transaction records from the day his wife passed away, about 13 months worth. To get those records, I had to go to the main branch, which was 2 hours away, and I spent the whole afternoon there going over everything. I cornered a service rep to explain all the debits and deposits, and that's when I realized just how recklessly dumb Mitch had been. My dad was receiving around $5K a month from disability and Social Security, and twice a week, Mitch was walking into the bank and withdrawing every last penny in cash for 13 months straight. Each time he did it, he had to sign a form as the POA, stating he was acting on my dad's behalf, and the bank notarized every single one of those forms. I reviewed every withdrawal and confirmed with the bank that Mitch made all of them. Next, I headed to the house and called a locksmith. I knew it was going to be bad, but I had no idea what was waiting for me inside. When the locksmith got the first door open, the stench hit us like a wall. It was overwhelming. We both gagged. After the second lock, I was so mortified by the mess he had to witness that I gave him a $60 tip. With new keys in hand, I called the cops. I explained that I was my dad's POA and was checking on his house, and that there were 3 vehicles on the property that didn't belong to him. When the officer asked if I knew whose they were, I said no, but I wanted them towed. He told me to call a tow company and that he'd meet them there. 2 tow trucks arrived and the driver hopped out, asking me to sign some paperwork. I only signed my first name. As I did, he asked, "You know Mitch?" Running purely on hate at that point, I replied, "Do you?" He nodded and said, "Yeah, he's a jerk." I looked at him and said, "Well, if you see him, can you let him know Mary is coming for him?" His confidence quickly faded. He knew trouble when he saw it. They hauled the trucks away. Once everyone left, I opened the carport door to take a peek inside. The sun was setting and the house was dark. I could hear faint noises, which I eventually recognized as roaches and rats scuttling around. The smell was so strong it clung to my hair. I sat on the carport steps and watched the sun disappear. I was furious, absolutely seething. 3 decades of my life unraveled in just 72 hours, and there I was, reeking and surrounded by filth, cleaning up after everyone else. I was taking time away from my own family, and for what? I had a moment of reckoning right there. I could either walk away now or go all in. And the thing about me is I'm stubborn as hell. It's in my nature, it's how I survived, and this was a bone I just couldn't let go of. The thought of Mitch's world crumbling, his likely only source of income disappearing overnight, and my dad hearing from me, of all people, that he was broke and alone, made me feel a twisted sense of joy. I wanted both of them to lose whatever they had left. So, I decided to go all in. That night, I looked up how to get a restraining order. Surprisingly, it was pretty easy. I went to the courthouse in my hometown, headed to the clerk's office, and said I needed a restraining order. I filled out the form at a wobbly little table right there. I wasn't expecting to see a judge that day, but the clerk told me, "Let me see if the judge is still here." That made me a little nervous. She took me to his office, and while I waited, I noticed the walls were covered in certificates of appreciation from veteran groups. I wiped my palms and thought, this is going to be like shooting fish in a barrel. The judge asked about my dad's time in the Marines and commented on the DoD logo on my sweater since I work as a contractor. He read through my form and granted the temporary order. I'd have to come back for the permanent one, where Mitch would have the chance to contest it. Then I went home and started looking up biohazard cleanup services and elder abuse laws in my state. I hired a biohazard crew to clean out all the crap from the house for $7K, and honestly, I would have paid double. During the cleanup, they discovered my dad's mummified dog buried under a pile of pizza boxes in the master bedroom. They sent me photos and managed to salvage a few important documents. Around this time, Mitch got served and a court hearing was scheduled. I started gathering and organizing evidence like it was my full-time job. I made photo logs, spreadsheets, and timelines with all the cross-references you could imagine because, at this point, they had my undivided attention. Truthfinder and Trello, the paid versions, were my lifesavers during this whole mess. Whenever I had some free time, I'd stop by the nursing home and hand my dad 8x10 photos of his dead dog from every possible angle. Before the court date, I went to the local police station to report an elder abuse crime. A white-collar detective came out and dismissed it as a domestic issue, saying that since Mitch was the POA, his actions were perfectly legal. That's when I got to school a small-town detective on the fiduciary duties of a power of attorney, courtesy of Google. I handed him a printed copy of the relevant statute with all the important parts highlighted. Then I passed him a thick folder stuffed with bank statements, photos of the hoarded house and the dead dog, a copy of my dad's credit report showing he was drowning in debt, and a spreadsheet that detailed every cash withdrawal, adding up to over $130 cash stolen in cash alone. That's not even counting the lost value of the house or the credit card debt Mitch ran up. I told the detective he could keep the folder since it wasn't my only copy, then said I'd wait for a case number and took a seat. About 30 minutes later, he came back, apologized, said I had a solid case, and handed me a case number. After that, I headed straight to the courthouse. The end. When I arrived, the courtroom was full, and I had to wait my turn. While I was sitting there, in walks Mitch, looking like he just crawled out of a dumpster. He showed up alone, disheveled, and quite literally filthy. His shoes were untied, and that little detail set me off into a fit of giggles. When our turn finally came, we both stood up. The same judge from before asked us some questions, then turned to me and asked if I had proof. I handed him my massive folder of evidence. The judge asked if I'd been to the police. Yes, sir, I have. Do you have a case number? Why, yes, I do. The judge granted the order, permanently and for life, but not before pausing the proceedings to advise Mitch that he seriously needed to get himself a lawyer. Someone mentioned that the courthouse would have a copy of my dad's military discharge papers, DD-242, so I snagged a copy while I was there because why not? I also used my POA to remove Amber Wife's name from the deed to the house. That way, if my dad died and it went into probate, Mitch wouldn't have an immediate claim. I also got copies of my dad's birth certificate and Amber Wife's death certificate. Technically, I wasn't supposed to be able to request those as a stepchild, but the clerk recognized my dad's name and told me she lost her virginity to my Uncle Mark back in the 60s and had even attended my grandparents' funeral. She hooked me up with all the forms I needed. Amber Wife had left my dad $50K in life insurance, and about $35K of that was still left because Mitch had been blowing through my dad's money instead of his mom's. I opened an Ally account and transferred every last cent over, then set up automatic transfers for his monthly deposits, keeping no more than $100 in his main account at any time. I found a house flipper who offered just enough to cover the mortgage, and I sold the house. That's the thing with probate. There's nothing to fight over if there's nothing left. I made sure there was absolutely nothing. My dad died thinking he still owned a house. While digging through paperwork, I found my dad's life insurance policies. They were current, and Amber Wife was listed as the beneficiary. My POA didn't let me change beneficiaries, but it did allow me to reassign them, and since Amber Wife was already dead, technically there was no beneficiary. That's where the death certificates came in handy. I assigned my sister and me as beneficiaries irrevocably, which meant the only way to change it would be for my dad, my sister, and me all to agree, which wasn't happening. I kept my dad in the dark about everything. All he ever really knew about was the restraining order and his dead dog. At one point, I found out he'd bought the gravesite next to Amber Wife and wanted to be buried beside her. Well, that was never going to happen. I looked up national cemeteries and discovered that, as a disabled Vietnam-era veteran, he qualified for one. So I set it up for him to be buried there instead. All the cherries on top. My dad passed away this June, and I was there. He's buried in a national cemetery far away where no one will ever visit him. The only obituary I ran was on the funeral home's website, and that was just for insurance purposes. I kept it as vague as possible. There was no service. His urn is purple, the color he despised the most. In August, I got a call from the prosecutor's office in my hometown. The woman on the line was married to my first cousin, because of course she was. That's just how it works there. She told me Mitch was arrested just after midnight on July 1st and was still sitting in jail. He'd been arraigned on felony elder abuse charges and was facing up to 10 years in the FPMITA prison. She warned me not to expect the trial to start anytime soon, since these things can drag on for up to 3 years. I told her that was fantastic, because the uncertainty would hang over him like a cloud, and after that, he'd still have prison to look forward to. He lost his kids, he lost his dad, I'm spending his mom's cancer money, he lost his free house and trucks, his credit is ruined, and he'll never land a decent job. Hopefully for a long time, he won't find a decent place to live either. And I sleep like a baby. A couple of years ago, I shared a revenge story involving my stepmother, Amber Wife, my stepbrother Mitch, and my dad, who's now resting in that purple urn he would have hated. To recap, Mitch was my dad's power of attorney while he was ill, and he grossly abused his position, stealing a massive amount of money. When I stepped in, I got a restraining order against Mitch, filed charges, took over my dad's care, and dished out some sweet, calculated revenge along the way. The court's victim's advocate, who also happens to be my first cousin because that's just how it is in that town, warned me that bringing Mitch to trial would take a very long time, and she was right. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Mitch's online activities. When he moved out of state, I let the court know, just in case it violated his bail. When he got a job as a truck driver, I called the court again to inform them he was regularly crossing state lines, potentially violating his bail terms. Then, about 6 months ago, I got another call from the victim's advocate. The trial date was approaching, and the court wanted the family's input on potential plea deals and sentencing. Mitch had been indicted on felony elder abuse charges and was staring down the barrel of a 15-year prison sentence. The advocate explained that we could push for prison time or plea him down to work release with restitution. Going to the police department with a similar plea deal was a ceremonial psych punch. No, the upside of prison was obvious, but the downside was that we probably wouldn't see any restitution since Mitch would be broke and behind bars. With work release, we'd get restitution, but Mitch would maintain some level of freedom. She asked which we preferred. I told her I needed a night to think it over. Mitch's future was in my hands, and I wanted to relish the moment. What kind of God did I want to be? To decide, I crunched the numbers. If he went to prison for 15 years, he'd likely serve half or less. 7 years is a long time, but restitution would take longer, and I liked the idea of taking his money every single month for years on end. I loved imagining him grinding away in miserable conditions for garbage pay, knowing that part of his paycheck was going straight to me. That thought brought me joy. I called her back and told her we were fine with a plea deal involving felony supervised release and restitution. I didn't hear much until last week when the advocate called to let me know Mitch had accepted the deal. The deal. Mitch pled guilty to felony elder exploitation, first degree. He got a 15-month sentence, split and suspended, meaning he won't spend any time in jail. He'll be on felony work supervision for 2 years, which requires him to check in with a parole officer daily and undergo frequent drug testing. After that, he'll be on regular probation for up to 5 years. The judge will have him check in regularly to make sure he's paying restitution and meeting the conditions of his release. The restitution. Mitch has to pay back $130,539.39. He was ordered to start paying $300 a month beginning January 1, 2024. My calculations paid off. At $300 a month, it will take him 36 years to pay it all back. If he misses a payment, he'll be thrown in jail. So for decades, I'll be in his life, taking back what he stole from us bit by bit. I think that's the end of the road. I've done everything I can, short of being there to catch him if he screws up his release conditions. Thanks for following along on this twisted tale of revenge. I hope it adds a little warmth to your holiday season